Welcome, mystery seekers. Tonight, I would like to take you back to the early years of the 18th century and to Charnes Hall, the ancient home of the Young family that lies westward beyond Eccleshall. We find ourselves in the vaults of the medieval chapel that once stood by the entrance to Charnes Hall, where, laid out in her coffin, we see the recently deceased lady of the house, Mistress Young. Young by name and young in years, this delicate lady was struck down with a mysterious malady and, fearing the worst, summoned her family and servants around her bedside to bid a fond farewell. She asked of those gathered round to make her one final promise, that the heirloom ring she always wore, and rumoured by some to be priceless, be buried with her. She then sunk back into her pillow and was gravely pronounced dead. A sorrowful funeral cortege carried her through the wintry landscape from the hall to the chapel, where the young mistress was laid out as you see her now. But hark! Is that the sound of some intruder coming to disturb milady's final rest? Sure enough, and it is none other than the family's own coachman, an odious and avaricious individual who is of the opinion that the heirloom ring is far too valuable to go to waste in the Charnes vault. Pushing aside the coffin lid, the ring seems like easy pickings, yet, for all his efforts, the coachman is unable to prise it from Mistress Young's finger. Not to be foiled, the coachman takes out his knife and hacks at the pale, thin finger, which strangely starts to bleed. Perplexed, but not to be swayed in his dishonest task, the coachman severs the ring finger and starts back in absolute horror as Lady Young sits bolt upright in her coffin and lets out a horrifying scream as she rises from her coffin, holding her bleeding, mutilated hand in front of her. The coachman, still clasping the finger and its ring, flees into the night, never to be seen or heard of again. As for Mistress Young, who had in fact lapsed into a coma, only to be awoken by the trauma of the coachman's knife, she shuffles towards Charnes Hall, her white silk shroud spattered with blood. Faint through shock and the bitterly cold night, she staggers towards a lighted window and sees her grieving husband sitting by the fire. Tapping on the window pane, she calls, "I am so cold, husband. Let me in, I pray." Her husband, once recovered from the shock of seeing his departed wife, rushes outside and finds her still very much alive and whisks her indoors out of the cold night air. Mistress Young goes on to live a full and healthy life, and when she does die for real, many years later, she is laid to rest not at Charnes, but in the churchyard at Eccleshall. However, it is whispered that her ghost returns to Charnes Hall, where the sight and sound of the silken shroud draped around her has given rise to her ghostly nickname, Silkie. It is said she wanders around the passageways and grounds, still searching for her lost ring and her missing finger. Exactly how the groovy gentleman at the organ crept into the scene, we are somewhat at a loss to explain. However, suffice it to say that, in his enthusiastic rendering of Bach's Toccata Fugue in D minor, he has, in a desperate effort to please, worn his fingers to the bone.